Speaking in Brussels this morning, the Taoiseach also said Russia's invasion of Ukraine will make this winter more complex. Our economics correspondent, Paul Colgan, has more on this. So flagging a possible recession, Paul, but it's not a given yet.
Yeah, so this is day two of a big meeting of European leaders in Brussels, and they're really focusing on their economies and the risks that lie ahead. This morning, the Minister for Finance, who heads up the Eurogroup, is to brief those EU leaders on the situation, along with Christine Lagarde, who's president of the European Central Bank. And they're looking at inflation, how they're dealing with inflation, but at the same time protecting their citizens against the cost of living crisis. And the dreaded R word has come up repeatedly over recent days. Germany is very worried about the next 6 months. It's concerned the Russians might switch off gas altogether. They've seen it reduce significantly over recent weeks. They're into an emergency plan, and there's the prospect of gas rationing in Europe's biggest economy, which would have spillover effects right around the continent and within the Eurozone. So Paschal Donoghue spoke to reporters before he headed into that briefing this morning, and this is what he had to say about the risk of recession.
We've acknowledged that recession is a risk in all of the economic forecasts that have been brought forward over the last number of months. But what we are seeing happening at the moment is lower growth rather than a recession materialise. And this is why I go back to the balance that finance ministers are trying to attain, putting in place measures that do support growth, that do protect employment, while at the same time acknowledging that measures are now happening to try to reduce inflation and ensure that it does not become part of how our economies function in the years ahead.
Now, it has to be said, the forecasts here in Ireland don't see a recession. The ESRI just this week said they believe growth would continue, but that would be turned on its head if there was a more dramatic development with regards to gas supplies. So the Taoiseach was also asked about the risk of recession, and this is what he had to say. He said he believes there's a risk, but that economies like Ireland are doing quite well at the minute.
There's a risk of recession globally and across Europe, but you can't take that as a given, and that's why this particular period has to be navigated very carefully. Our FDI side is strong, our industrial side generally, both indigenous and FDI is strong. But if global markets start weakening, then that could potentially in 2023 affect our export performance. There's no immediate sign of that yet. If you watched for the last number of weeks, companies are investing in Ireland, companies are continuing to invest in Ireland, but we have to try and get the balance right. We don't want to end up in a stagflation situation, and that's something we want to try and avoid at all costs.
So there's all these big policy problems. How do you battle inflation and at the same time stop borrowing costs for countries on the edge of the Eurozone spiralling out of control like they did 10 years ago, and Ireland found itself in that category? So there's a big range of decisions that have to be made over the next few weeks. The Taoiseach said he believed that this winter is going to be very challenging because of what Russia is doing, and he said it could prove more complex than it was to procure COVID vaccines last year.
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that.